I was surprised in the morning. It turns out that today is the anniversary of the day of the events that I actually want to tell. It turns out that on the 26th, there was a rally, a fight that took place in Crimea near the parliament. Quite a strange coincidence, although before that I thought a lot about when to start. I was preparing. And it so happened that the stream will be released on this very day. Interesting coincidence. Well, let's get started. Hello, everyone. First of all, why do I want to make this video? I've been thinking about it for a long time. I've been discussing it with friends and acquaintances who participated in the events in 2014 to understand whether or not I have such an opinion about what happened. And maybe it's just my fantasy, or I'm thinking something superfluous. To begin with, I will say that all the events described are my personal vision, my personal opinion. I don't know how, where, and in what places it happened. I can only answer from my immediate environment, for what I saw myself, for what I did myself. I may not guess anything. I can also confuse the sequence of events. I am making this video for one reason, because I believe that the same events that took place in Crimea and, in fact, in Kiev are being prepared in Moscow. Whether or not they will succeed in turning them over, perhaps the government will not be able to allow the beginning of this Maidan, but there's still a very big chance. Therefore, even if some of the people who will see me, hear, understand how it happened in Crimea, it is possible to avoid a coup d'etat in Russia, after which, if it succeeds, there will be a collapse of Russia, in fact, a war of all with all. Everyone, well, as it were, the end of statehood. Here you can have no doubts. If it succeeds within, probably 5 years after that, Russia will cease to exist. The Maidan in Russia, well, or the coup d'etat in general, once again, this Maidan will most likely be in a patriotic way, as far as I can see, and only suitable events are expected. An example of such an event is the recent situation with Wagner and his shipments of shells, and how he was tried to untangle in some publics, Telegram, other social networks, which is supposedly super patriotic and for all the good against all the bad. There, it was just untied, right up to the fact that you are already going out on the street, and we will strive to deliver shells and so on. That is, it seems to be the right direction. Everything is patriotic, but this can lead to undesirable consequences. I'm talking about the fact that the event can be anything. The main thing is that people come out under any pretext, and then the protest will be reformatted in the right way. The reason for the beginning of the protest itself, as in Kiev, is not important. There, people came out initially under some other slogans. Then it was all reformatted in place, directed in the right direction, brought who needed it, and everything went and went. That's why I want to make this video. Maybe it will help something. If the Maidan in Moscow is still organized, at least some people will tell someone something. Maybe someone will see. Well, there's even 1,000 people. If they see it, it's already good. In general, I will start the story. It all started with the fact that the Maidan began in Kiev. State coup, all that. There are acquaintances who personally took the Berkut there on buses. The Crimean Berkut was really humiliated and beaten there. They tried to turn over a bus on Maidan. The Berkuts themselves, those who drove, held the bus so that it would not be turned over. On the way home, they were beaten quite seriously. When they drove, they were shelled. Meanwhile, rallies were held in the center of Crimea, which were organized. Mosques and organizations at the time of Hezbollah Takir, they are banned in the Russian Federation, in support of Maidan. At one of these rallies, it was immediately announced, that is, they collected a bunch of people, brought them. From the Crimean side, there were practically no people at this rally. They brought the guys and said that the monument to Lenin, which is located in the center of Simferopol, to demolish the government within 3 days. If this is not done, then they will do it themselves, and some sort of disassembly will begin. In general, the parliament will begin to seize. Berkut returned. They came, brought them to the Crimea, to the square, well, to the central square. We actually have one central square here. When people saw them, they realized that, first of all, they were in a rather difficult position. and also that, in fact, the only force left in Crimea that has weapons is Berkut. And if Berkut and the armed people who are supposed to protect the peace of citizens acted like this in Kiev, then it's not a fact that it will be different here in Crimea. Then Berkut locked himself in his department. And Berkut was guarded by ordinary people from the outside. That is, women, men, and carried food for them. Berkut locked himself up and was under the protection of ordinary people. That is, at this moment, nothing is bothering anyone anymore. And that the state structure that was humiliated in Kiev is guarded by ordinary people. Who are they guarding it from? This is also a question. They began to hold rallies with calls not to recognize the coup d'etat in Kiev officially. Moreover, Crimea is an autonomy at that time, and there was such an opportunity in Crimea. There were 3 or 4 such rallies. Only a small number of people attended them. That is, there were few people. At that time, we had a portrait studio on order with a friend. There was an ordinary printer and an understanding of everything that happens thanks to my girlfriend. She has a higher education in international relations, and she told and showed why it happens and what will happen next. This micro business of ours was, in fact, transformed into something like a headquarters, where we sent all the information from the street. She spread it to the public. I suppose that we were not the only ones who did this. That is, in fact, we left making money and did only one thing. Because as soon as everything started to get started in Kiev, the girl explained everything, showed where to look, read what to check. Based on this, some conclusions were made. By the way, it is interesting that everything that was happening in Kiev was done according to the methods that the girls took in the classes at the university. Everything was so open and clear. That is, the organization of the rally. People in red jackets who lead the movement, and so on. But even some of the students she studied with still believed that they would sign an association and live like in Europe. At that time, all relatives and acquaintances were against this coup and attempts to arrange it in Crimea. In general, everyone I know, well, with the exception of a few people, they were neutral in their opinion. Like, I'm not interested in this topic, I'll just do my own thing and it doesn't concern me. On TV, on all channels, on the internet in general, everything said that everyone is for the Maidan and everyone supports it inside the Crimea, in the Crimea. That is, when you go on social networks, you can see it now. All the comments are filled with the fact that Putin is bad, for example, and must leave, and everyone supposedly supports it. Everyone spreads it. I would like to mention separately about TV channels, as we saw it personally. The beginning of the Maidan in Kiev was covered more or less adequately. Journalists showed, nationalists talked about robberies, pogroms, about some battalions, about inadequate behavior, showed these videos, showed people, showed that, in principle, there is a coup d'etat. But literally a few days passed, and the rhetoric of all channels suddenly changed. Total brainwashing began. Some kind of crazy Ukrainian patriotism, which never existed. In Ukraine before that, in Kiev has always been a Russian-speaking city. There were threats to everyone who disagreed. And those channels that tried to convey at least part of the truth, they were simply closed. People came, closed, and destroyed, directly in the physical sense of the word. In fact, there was nowhere to find out the truth. Only the Sarafan radio transmitted everything that was happening here, inside the city, and numerous Russian reports that took place here. And also people shared their videos, shared their opinions on the internet. And so we tried to find out what was going on in each of the cities. At that moment, it was very important to understand that something bad was happening. And just turn off all the TV channels. That is, stop watching them. Were they patriotic before that? Did you watch them or not? We just got rid of any such information. People intuitively felt the rejection of all the information that they began to propagate and impose. That is, there was no such thing in Crimea, but they tell you on TV that it is so here. You go out into the street and you don't see it. And therefore, it was all perceived in a strange way. There were, of course, those who believed, but these are, in principle, people who are everywhere. They're usually the most active and create this, in fact, public opinion on the internet. They're usually used. We had our own personal V-contactee groups related to work, our own pages. People created in Crimea while other people in other regions also created the same groups. We prepared brochures, posts with a description of the situation. Well, that is advertising. That's how I make an intro to my videos. That's how we made calls for advertising. Tried to explain what was going on in general, even found, save such a record, a template of a leaflet, an ad that we pasted on the pillars. And it was written there already then. That is, we were there for 20-something years. And we were already then wrote about this coup d'etat in order to start a war with Russia. Well, if we had guessed that all this would lead to war, and without any predictions and so on, then do not be surprised that people, for example, like Zhirinovsky, some people understand this, just someone says, and someone does not. In these groups, in general, we prepared posts, posted them, and also reported when the rally will take place. What will actually happen? Pasted announcements on the post. At that time, it was still an actual way of posting ads and then some kind of information. That is, people went and read these ads on the streets before the rally. They handed out papers with the call to go to the rally. That is, we ourselves bought the paper, printed it somehow on the printer, and just approached people. Said that, come because it will be very bad. Now, a little bit to the side. There was an interesting observation. There were a lot of social groups on the internet, which at that time were called it anti-Maidan. There were 100, 200,000 people in them at that time. These were huge numbers, huge amounts for V-contact. And what do you think? Absolutely all of them merged. They just stopped working. Everything related to money, advertising. That is, they posted paid posts. Everything stopped responding. And post any objective information, that is, posts that it was well posted. If we wrote there, said that the meeting is now taking place, people are fighting, Lenin is trying to demolish, and so on, go outside. It was not covered at all. And so it was everywhere. In Crimea, there was a clear understanding at once that if they come here, there will be a coup d'etat with us. There will be a massacre. There will be victims. That is, each of us began to feel that each of us will come personally and most likely kill him. Screams in the style of Crimea will be Ukrainian or homeless were sent to us from Kiev. And they existed, these screams, long before the Crimeans even expressed their position about joining Russia or something else. That is, people just live peacefully and quietly here, but they were already threatened that you raznyaram, we will come, we will cut. Constant threats in the media, the internet, that they will come, they will kill. Everyone. There was a complete feeling that not only all of Ukraine supports the coup d'etat, but the whole of Crimea supports it. If you read not to communicate with people, but to read posts on the internet and comments at that moment. Of course, it is worth saying that here everyone has always been for Russia, considered themselves Russian, and Ukraine has never tried to conquer love, only by force and threats. So everyone clearly understood that there was no hope for anyone. And if anything, they would just kill everyone. That is, everyone literally understood this, especially since in Ukrainian publics, they wrote openly and not just wrote. They even collected the so-called trains of friendship. That is, it is voiced in the film about Crimea. That is, these are wagons in which the extreme nationalists, with a certain level of training, armed and were going to go to the Crimea to seize power, to arrange unrest. You know, the blacksmiths gathered there and so on. In general, they went to the defense, and they were scared and did not get there. They went somewhere in Kherson. After that, protests began near the government with the call not to recognize the coup. We, as we could, called people to these protests with posts, announcements, leaflets. Guess what happened at this time with the Crimean parliament? Most of the deputies disappeared. There should have been more than half of them there to make at least some decision. Well, it's called a quorum. And there were 10, 12 of them. And they were sitting there for the whole day, probably waiting for someone else to pull up. No one wanted to go. They disappeared. That is, people chose them. But as a difficult situation, there was no one at all. There were Aksinov, Konstantinov, and another 10 people. Literally. This is my opinion, maybe as a joke, that Aksinov began to go out to people and report something, although I don't know who he was at that time. Well, no one really knew about him. Probably, just like the highest, well, so strong they sent him so that people there would not beat him right away. Out of 60 or so deputies, 10 to 15 people came, and so it went on 3-4 times. As a result, before the last and main event, ordinary people came to Gazelle Square, brought the generator, brought the horn, assembled a small, well, the men came, got together. I mean, I was there, saw it all, and said to the parliament that they still haven't finished the meeting, that is, they haven't all left yet, that if you don't assemble the forum tomorrow, then personally, each of the deputies will come home and be forced to work, so that they just do their duty and just work. And the fact that all the addresses of all the deputies are known, it is clear that half of the country has already left at that moment. But these are just ordinary people who came and made such a statement. I heard personally. Most likely, it was during this period there were attempts to defend the railway station. This night, most likely, the guys with shields met the trains of friendship on the platforms. These trains came completely empty. Apparently they were warned that they were waiting for them here and no one was sitting at home. And they left the train in Kherson, did not want to risk. They thought that it would probably be in Simferopol, like in Kiev. No resistance, burn, crush, capture. But it didn't work out. At that time, they did not have the necessary number of people and training. Then the main day of the rally was appointed. Those events in which people died. Everyone knows the fight, which is a video that you can see on the internet. How it happened, what happened in general. We were on the street that day in the morning, distributed leaflets printed on paper, glued them around the city, called people, wrote in groups, posted, wrote in general to all groups. There were several literally, I even recently found it in the correspondence, who responded and posted on their own. But all these groups were there, 1,000 people, 2,000, everything that was large just disappeared. It did not show any reaction at all. Well, it just didn't work. You can say that. We went and did it all just because we realized that from the side of the Mieglis, everything is organized, everything is ready. And more people are gathering every time than the Crimans. I remember the moment when we were giving out leaflets. A woman was walking down the street. We came up to her and said, "Here's a leaflet. Be sure to come to the rally." She said, "I'm going there, actually. I understand what's going on." I told my director, the boss, that if you want, fire me, do what you want, but I will go, because I understand that this is important. And she just turned around and left the office. Actually, I'm going there. There were crowds of people with screams on the streets. Simferopol, get up. Everything I described was organized simply by people. That is, no parties, nothing at all. Everyone merged. In general, everyone disappeared. Many understood, in general, that the decisive day had come, and if we lose, the massacre will begin. You know, most of the people, as usual, were watching the Kosovo going to work. As always, from the side, someone will decide for us. They will sort something out, and everything will be fine. The government is not like that. The government betrayed, and so on. What I describe, I want to describe how it happened in my eyes. At night, personally, we met with friends, agreed with some guys. Well, that is the directors of some companies, but they called themselves that. That is, we just met on the street, agreed without phones, without anything, met in some unknown places. Well, they asked us, what is the number of people there, and so on. With ordinary people, that is, they had finances, they had money. It was discussed where, and with whom, what kind of weapon. Well, knives, because there are some hunters. This was the only weapon. Some shelters in the forests. All women, all relatives, grandmothers were given instructions. At least all my friends and relatives, where to go, through which paths, in which villages, where to hide. Because the airport is nearby, and the city itself is small in Simferopol. That is, it was very dangerous to stay here, just in case. It may even be funny, in some sense, like they were worried in vain and decided everything for us. But everyone understood that there was nowhere to wait for help. There was a vague hope at that moment for the Black Sea Fleet, and that if there is a bullet somewhere nearby, they would at least resist. That is, at least the Black Sea Fleet would not be captured. At that moment, Poroshenko came. Since he came, then they already understood that he would be president. He was accompanied by the police, and he walked along the central street where there were people. And guess who didn't let him in for the sake of the Crimea to the Verkhovna? Ordinary people who stood on the street. He was guarded by the police. He was put there by the people of Fingal, and he was surrounded by guards of order. They pushed him into the car and told him to leave. Ordinary people prevented the events that could unfold. He went there, of course, to negotiate. Another thing that says that people can still do something. At these rallies, when Aksionov came out, there were not many people, in principle. We personally approached him. There was some vague feeling that we would join Russia. Well, this was the only option, in fact, or autonomy. I mean, let's join Russia. Well, I have my friends. I don't know how others do. We just came up with something in our heads. We approached him, asked if we would join Russia, if it was possible. He then looked like a fool, like, well, what can't be like that? And there is no talk about it at all. Here, at least, so that people would gather, well, deputies and make a decision that they simply do not recognize the state coup that took place in Kiev. But in general, probably, people already had a feeling that this was the only way out. Well, this is some kind of prehistory to the main events. I will describe the main events and the fight itself. We gathered people as we could. Not everyone wanted. Someone was afraid. Someone just worked, continued to work. From the side of the Tatars, but there were practically no Tatars. And those who live here now, that is, from the side of the Melees, a band organization. They brought old people with flags. And from our side, 3 times fewer people gathered. They brought everything they could bring to the street, at least with some proposals. Someone brought children. That is, they were preparing for a peaceful rally. From the side of the mosque, people were taken away in an organized manner. It was immediately clear. There are these video recordings. No one spoke Russian there. That is, people are supposedly criminals who live here. But none of them could say a word in Russian except for Allah Akbar. There was practically nothing to hear. Well, with the exception of some old people who were just brought in and who hardly understood what was happening. Well, that is, everything was organized, collected, everything was clear there. In ours, there were too few criminals, much fewer. We called our improvised headquarters and reported that there were not enough people. That is, there were much fewer of us. Now they will accept. Well, that is, it is necessary to press on the parliament to make the necessary decision. The people are for, but there was a feeling that they were against. And somehow, gradually, people began to quit their jobs, went out, pulled up. People from Sevastopol and Eupatoria themselves organized buses. Who had some buses? Someone from work. They were thrown on gasoline, organized, because there was a complete feeling that we were losing. Most of the arrivals arrived already at the end of the fight itself and the events. At first, there were much fewer people from the Crimean side, directly, radically fewer. At this time, almost all of the media were silent. All publics, large groups, everything related to money, well, where there is at least some kind of advertising, everything is complete silence, total. There was no government at all. Nothing was organized. No one was in charge of anything. That is, there was one Aksionov who was in the center of the crowd. Well, he was clinging, if you can say so, and shouted out, like, disperse, we are criminals, and so on. That is, he tried to somehow calm down. The head of the forbidden organization, Gilles, was standing and smiling at the top. Also, everything was organized from the side of the so-called Crimean Tatars. They were working in waves, that is, they were pushing. And from our side, they just stood and did not understand. That is, people came to a peaceful rally, with flags, with children, with Russia. Something else, that is, they were happy. They were waving flags. Well, just as to the game, to some extent, they were related. On the other hand, everything is in waves from above, if you watch the video. Most of them are in black jackets, strong guys. Among them in red jackets are placed. Well, in short, each sector is divided there by a red person in a red hood, who is in hood, charge of all this. This is a standard how to manage a crowd. It was in Kiev, it was in Crimea, it was all clearly visible. Between two crowds of people stood a column of the police. At that time, it was called the police. Now, it's the police, of course. That is, there was a corridor. On the one hand, there was the police. On the other hand, there was the police. And the crowds were chanting something there and just waving flags. At one point, they all lined up and left. The whole militia was, for some reason, under an order. I don't know. I can't say for sure. The whole security, the whole militia was taken out. It just turned around and left. Although before that, everything was under control and they were armed. And the fight began, wall by wall. 2 people were killed at that moment. 32 or 35. 36 people were injured. Everything was organized. Everyone was of a sports body. On our side, there were women, children even. People went to a peaceful rally, I repeat. In the center of the crowd, Aksionov was shouting that there was no introduction to Russia. There was nothing to talk about. What are you talking about at all? And he disbanded the crowds. The majors pushed out of our circle and broke the doors of the parliament, the windows. My friend was standing there next to these doors and began to crush the parliament. All this time we tried to highlight these events. Some pieces of video were thrown away. We said that this is the situation. Let's go out. Let's go out. All these buses have already left. That is, people organized, that they understood that the parliament was practically captured. And as a result, when part of the melees has already pushed out more, our parliament looks like a pentagon. We call it that. It is a round building with a courtyard inside. And there was a struggle for this courtyard. Michaelis pushed it out. They pushed it out completely. People died because they were not ready. There was a Cossacks, just ordinary people. They were organized, they acted in waves, everything was according to the rules, and our people did not understand what was going on at all. But when it started to reach people, maybe this is the plus that won. In general, well, we won, you can say. The crowd on our side, well, that is, we have a circle and a long street, and our people were pushed out of the circle. There were about half as many of them, and they began to pull up from all cities, from all regions. That is, it is clear that in our Crimea, Simferopol is the center. This is where all the events will take place. In Russia, this is Moscow. In any case, the main events related to the coup are taking place in such places. The crowd from our side is lined up for more than 2 kilometers. The whole street, well, I just looked at the map. How long it takes? 2 kilometers of people lined up. For us, this is a lot, because at that moment, 2 million people lived all over the Crimea. That is, it cannot be compared to Moscow. Therefore, I say that the events there can be much tougher. From the side of melees, there were also gazelles with weapons in the park. Why didn't they use it? Or there was some kind of signal. Or on our part, too many people gathered for them. They all gathered in 1 minute and just left. And it turned out a situation when finally everyone understood, everyone realized at their workplaces and so on, that there is no power in Crimea at all. It is on the floor. All services, all structures, all media, nothing works. No one is hoped for. The only organization is Berkut, since they have the only weapon, and he could at least somehow stand on the side of the people. But he was guarded by the people. The question is, who was he guarding from? And I remember we were walking from one of the rallies, discussing with friends that the authorities are lying on the floor, in fact, and someone more or less who is in a state, well, we are very small, so to speak, where we need to just pick her up, friend, and that's it, and she will be yours. Everyone left her. The realization came that the next day will be decisive. The parliament will have to defend itself, most likely, with the use of some kind of weapon. With friends, with all acquaintances, everything was organized. Announcements, they slept dressed, various cases. What if so? What if they disconnect the connection? Where do we meet? Where do we go? Where do we move? At what time? Where are the weapons of some acquaintances through acquaintances of the hunters? Where did you go? What forests? And on the same evening, ordinary people began to build barricades around the parliament, to supervise, to guard the parliament, to carry food. All this was organized by ordinary people. They dragged garbage from all regions, boards, surrounded the inner courtyard of the parliament, armed themselves with sticks, and began to spend the night there alternately. All of them were sleeping, all of them were dressed, all of them with knives. At night, the one who was guarding actually, well, there is a video, it's quite interesting. He said that KMAS or BTRs had arrived. Military with armed weapons came out of it. He was standing there, not knowing what to do. Well, he was going to call them and ask them, like, who are you, in general? They answered him that they were their own. And there is a video. He almost cries. He tells that, well, he helped them to bring everything into the building. In general, in the morning, there was a strange feeling above all the administrative buildings. Russian flags were raised. The city was empty. Well, then it's all a referendum, more or less organized, and so on. There were a couple of shootings, some were incomprehensible, but in Crimea, there was practically no weapons. Everything was stolen in all parts. I don't have the right to talk about some of them, but in short, there was a bucket with weapons, and then the guys arrived in military uniform with machine guns. And they didn't see such weapons here, in fact. And then it was quite offensive, well, in some sense. This is when, after joining all these rallies and what crowds of people were on the streets, how everyone was rejoicing, waving. And when it was necessary to go out, when fate had been decided, no matter who you pull out, everyone hid in the houses and waited for something. And then these people write that it was the authorities who betrayed them, and it happened because someone decided something and they are not to blame. Somehow, I don't know by what miracle, people just gathered and managed to defend themselves. If at that moment the parliament was captured, Poroshenko would have come to him. Everything would have been agreed. They would have brought their own people and everything would have ended. This is the story from the first person. I will summarize a little. I will tell you why I decided to record this. And I didn't record it for so long. Well, and somehow just hold it. Discussed it with my friends and that's it. I don't know what kind of consequences there might be for the life of such a story, on the one hand and on the other, but the state was still Ukraine. First of all, this is an example of defending your right to the system in which you decided to be, which you chose, and in which the people decided to be. Everything was done on time. As soon as when the state coup was recognized in Kiev, the events in Crimea immediately began. In other regions, in most cases, it either didn't work out, and people retreated, tried to capture something, didn't understand, and left. Or it's all much later. We even discussed in families then that you go out. Why do you continue to work? What are you waiting for? It was an interesting thing that the Federation Council approved Putin's introduction of troops into foreign territory. And as soon as the Crimea was captured, he also banned Putin's power. As a result, none of the power systems worked at all. There was no law enforcement structure, no media, no military, no one at all. There was no one to count on, only on themselves, sticks, diggers, knives, some kind of shelter against the potential army or armed people from the Maidan who were going to go here. The police disappeared. The power disappeared. The main thing was not there. The authorities chose, in fact, Aksionov. And he at least somehow spoke on the side of the people, supported. And then it was just luck. Russia helped. Although no one, in principle, well, they shouted, but no one believed in this. Neither in the government nor anywhere. No one counted on it. They did not hope. Everyone understood that they would have to defend their land with blood. That is, well, most likely half will be beaten here, but almost no one ran. This is kind of a prehistory. Now, I think why I wrote it all down. I think that there's a very high probability of the same events in Moscow. And understand that if everything succeeds in turning the enemy over, no one will protect you. If Putin, as president or commander-in-chief, is somehow tried to withdraw from power, no one will take responsibility for themselves. in defense of the common people. All patriotic media will say that everything is so necessary, or they will turn on some entertainment programs for you that everything is fine. Police and other services can just disappear. They will not even try to protect civilians. Shops, business, state institutions, law, not because police officers are bad or because they are not patriots, but because no one will give such orders. No one will take responsibility for the decisions and actions of law enforcement. And there is also an additional bonus. You can find out about it. It is quite known that for something that did not come out or got sick, if you are a general or an official at the right time, the money prize will be from the enemy. Perhaps this is why there is such a thing on the front that you are watching. The note did not reach. They delayed a little, then it was delayed, then it got sick. The throat got sick. Here it was urgently necessary to fly to another country for the operation. That is, they do not risk anything. First of all, most of them have everything abroad, and secondly, they will also pay you money. That is just the paralysis of all power systems. And most likely, you will have to defend everything completely by your own strength, as in the Crimea. But in the case of Russia, there will be no one to come to help. No one will come. Do not count. Neither Belarus nor anyone. You already see how it is all, and how other countries trying to get away from everything that is happening. Russia is helping everyone. But as soon as the problems start here, no one will come to help. Then you just don't have to argue with me. Prove that we have nothing to do with it. This government betrayed us. We continued to work just on our jobs. Worked, and then they came to us and started to kill us. Then a massacre will come. It will be late. And in the case of Russia, there will be no help. Crimea was lucky, but no one here hoped for this. Everyone was ready to defend at least their land. There was no talk about the state at all. Just to defend their land, no one ran. That's the story.